And another completely overwhelming, massive reason and massive benefit of working from home is of course the lack of a commute. The commute, it can take, the commute is not just the actual time physically commuting. It's not. It's the whole preparation for work, or preparation for working in an office. When you work in an office, in Britain, where the transport is a total disaster, public transport I mean the railways are so expensive, buses don't cover all the routes and so forth, and it's freezing cold outside all the time, other than a few months of the year where the weather is okay in May, June, July, August. Outside of that, you're in crap wind, rain, horrible weather, unfortunately, when you're commuting. And ultimately, a lot of people that worked in offices are geographically restricted by how far they can travel reasonably, and for many people that will be maximum up to 1 hour. I mean, I would say even that is too much to travel to work. But it's not just the physical time on the road, which is terrible for the environment, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's also the preparation for working in the office, the having to change into certain clothes, having to prepare lunch if that's what you're going to do, prepare a healthy meal. You might be bringing a bean burrito, or you might be bringing some hummus sandwiches, or whatever it is that you want to bring if you eat vegetarian, vegan, as I try to do. It's much more easier. It's so time consuming if you was to work in an office. You have to, not only do you have to drive on the actual motorway or the road to get there, and our roads are a total disaster. In the main cities, they're so busy. The rush hour in Greater Manchester is terrible. Trying to get coming off the M61 or the M60 in the morning at rush hour to get into Manchester is atrocious. And even in the smaller towns around Manchester, all the towns like Oldham, Bolton, Wigan, all Salford, all the towns around Greater Manchester also have terrible traffic. They do, even if you want to get to the centre of any of those towns. And so, unfortunately, commuting then you've got to find a parking space. And many companies don't give you a parking space. They don't give you, they don't give you any allocation. You're just on the public road. But the public roads, even on your industrial estate, they may be double yellow lined. So, and you have to constantly think, oh, will I get a space today? And if you're on trains, you're constantly thinking, oh, is my train going to be on time? Is it going to be late? Because they get cancelled all the time. And they're horrible, and they're not modernised, and well, a lot of them are not. They use old fleet that's not been updated for years. There's so much I could say about it, that ultimately the commute you're spending, if you travel just 1 hour a week, 1 hour a day to work, or half an hour, you're spending, that's 2 hours a day. If it took you about an hour to get there, an hour to get back, that's 2 hours a day, that's 10 hours a week, that's 40 hours a month. That means you're basically working another week than everyone else that works from home. Because if you commuted for 40 hours a week, that's just the actual time on the motorway, or in the car, sorry. If you add up the additional time that getting changed, getting dressed and all that type of stuff, preparing your food for work if you bring food, when you add that in, which is at least an extra half an hour a day, when you add all that in, let's call it 60 hours a month, that you're basically working an extra week and a half than someone who's working at home. Because the person who's working at home, instead of getting on the commute to travel to Manchester or travel to Birmingham or London, wherever the hell he's going, instead of doing all that total bullshit, he can simply have his shower and get changed, and then he can make a nice hot drink with a nice bowl of porridge or cornflakes or whatever the hell it is, or fruit smoothie, and he can sit reading or focusing on something nothing to do with work, relaxing, listening to music, or he can learn a new skill, or he can work on his side business or do whatever he wants. He can get up. That work, if you work 9 to 5, that worker who would have to get up at 6:30 to get ready and prepare for work and then to commute, he can get up, if he really wanted to, at 8:30. He could spend an extra 2 hours in bed if he really wanted to. He could. When he comes home, when he finishes work, at 5 o'clock, instead of having that disastrous rush to get home, and nearly crashes and has to go through the worst, the worst congestion in Britain, in the centre of Manchester, which is as bad as London sometimes. Instead of all that total BS, which takes him an hour to get home, and he has to get changed from his clothes and have another shower or whatever he's doing, he can then at 5 o'clock when he's finished, he can get in his car, he can go to the gym, he can play sport, he can go spend that hour of rushing home. He can do whatever the hell he wants with that time. That is why people who work in an office are actually working a lot more. Their work, it takes over your life, because the commute is so and having to prepare for work, it's so draining, it's so physically draining having to do that. So the commute is a disaster. It is a total disaster, and I don't think there is any justification that, even if there's some tiny benefits in some regards to working in an office, I don't think that those tiny benefits in certain categories could possibly outweigh just that one benefit alone of not having to commute. Because the commute, even if it's just half an hour a day, half an hour every morning and half an hour at night, even if that was just, what is that, half an hour, so that's times 5, that's only like 5 hours a week. Well, that 5 hours a week in a month turns into 20 hours, which is half a week's work. When you add in all the preparation and stuff, as I've just said about, putting on your work clothes, preparing your food and all that type of stuff, and putting petrol in your car and all the other time that eats into it, when you add all that in, it's another week's work of just going to work that you're having to do because you work in an office, compared to someone working at home that doesn't participate in that total bullshit, that total BS, ridiculous, unnecessary drudgery is not required when you work at home. So it can't be compared to working at home. Just that one fact alone means you will never want to work in an office. You'll never want to work in a... If you've commuted, and I've commuted to Manchester, and I've commuted, over 1 hour to get to work, when you've done that, and people in India do it, and people all across the world do it, and I've seen people on Twitter talk about me time. They say, I like the commute because the commute gives me some me time. Now I know what they mean. They mean that when they live they might live in a flat, or they might live in a nice house, but if they've got 2 or 3 kids at home, and the kids are constantly... I don't have children, and I don't think I'm ever going to have them, for various reasons, but I can understand if you live in a totally busy house with no quiet area to do your work, why you might think, well, in the mornings when I'm going to work, I can listen to my music, or I can read a book. Now, well, you can't read a book when you're driving to work. You could listen to it in an audio book thing if you wanted to when you're driving, or listen to the radio. And don't get me wrong, I like to listen to music in the car, of course I do. But the idea that like or if you caught the train or buses, when you sat like clampets, rushing, trying to, not knowing if your next bus or train's going to be late, not knowing if you'll get a seat. The idea that is me time, and could be compared to sitting at home in a lovely warm room with a lovely beautiful setup to work and to do anything else that you want to do with your monitors and your computer and whatever it is you do. The idea that or sat in a really comfy chair reading a book, if that's what you want to do, the idea that can be compared to trying to get me time on a commute in a modern capitalist country, whether it's France, Britain, Germany, America, Australia, which all has varying degrees, or China, or Bangkok, Thailand. I've been on the trains in Bangkok, Thailand, beautiful trains, far nicer than England. I would never say that is me time. They're so busy, you're worried if people are going to rob you, pickpocket you. There's no way that is me time. That cannot be compared to doing that activity at home. It cannot be compared. That's insane. Unless your house is completely open plan and you have kids running around dead loud all the time. And that's what I think some people are getting at when they say, I like to read a book on the train. I like to learn a new skill. How can you learn a new skill on a train? How? You don't even get a seat. How can you? It's insane. It's total BS. It is total BS. And so I think that is just stress. So that's another reason why the commute and the freeing up of that commuting time when you work from home, allowing you to carry out your task that's nothing to do with work if you don't want it to be work, that's your relaxing time, is so much better. You feel like when you work from home, you feel like those 40 hours a week that you work, or 37 and a half, whatever it is that you work, you feel as though you only work that time. Whereas when you work in an office, it takes over everything, because the commute is so draining and the preparation for work is so draining. So it cannot be compared, and people who say it does are totally and utterly wrong. That is total BS. The next thing I'm going to talk about, that I completely forgot to talk about in the previous video, is I'll talk about the environment first, and then I'll talk about the next one, because the next one is another interesting one that people rarely talk about, that's a benefit of working at home. So we know that the environment is a disaster. The principal mechanism through which the environment, there's two principal mechanisms. One is the burning of fossil fuels that's causing the CO2 emissions and is causing the ozone layer to deplete and is destroying the planet. That's one way. Another way we're destroying it, obviously with the plastics and all that. Another principal cause of it is animal foods and the factory farming. The methane that's released from cows and everything that goes into factory farming and feeding the cattle, and all the water and resources that's required to do this is killing the planet. I think 50% of CO2 emissions are related to the factory farming, basically, or using animal foods. Humans, I'll do another video on this, humans have no requirement to eat animal foods. Humans basically are herbivores in our natural state. We should not be eating meat or dairy or oil. We shouldn't be eating it. We should be living on starches, potatoes, corn, beans, peas, sweet potatoes, brown rice, white rice, grains, wheat, barley, rye. We should live on starch with the addition of fruits and vegetables. There's no requirement for animal foods in the diet. You can get a B12 supplement in nutritional yeast in some fortified foods. You don't need to eat animal foods, it's a fact. There's no requirement for cholesterol in the human diet after you've weaned. There's no requirement for your mother's breast milk after you've weaned, or another animal's breast milk, or another animal's milk after you've weaned. There's no requirement for it. So don't drink cow's milk. That's stupid. That cow's milk's for the cow. But anyway, to cut a long story short, but because humans eat meat, even if we lived in a totally eco-socialist, non-capitalist planned economy, the environment would still be destroyed by eating animals. We need to stop eating animals. But another thing that destroys the environment is, of course, petrol and burning of fossil fuels. And ultimately, we can stop a lot of that, even though we need to stop fast fashion, and we need to stop buying as many physical goods, consuming as many physical goods, like computers and TVs and all that. That is also destroying the planet to a degree. We need to reduce the amount of that we do. and I'm guilty for buying smartphones, and I'm guilty for buying, but ultimately we need to live in a far more simpler eco-socialist state. That means not buying loads of clothes, not buying 20 leather jackets, that means living much more frugally, and not seeing fast fashion as a luxury, and removing as best as you can fossil fuels from your life. Now that is very difficult, obviously, but as a society as a whole, we could plan to stop using petrol. But the fact is, using any vehicle causes environmental damage to some degree. Rubber on Tesla cars, rubber on electric cars will still go into the environment. It will still, off the tyres, the brake pads and so forth. What I'm saying is, the commute in and of itself, using vehicles to around, it has an effect on the environment. And the commute enables us as a society to reduce the amount of damage on the environment to some degree that we do. And so the commute is massively positive. Sorry, no commute is massively beneficial to the environment. So any working from home, if the environment, and I've heard stories that Bangladesh and Jakarta and other places, that because the relationship with the sea level, if the sea level rises, they're not going to be here in a few years' time. Those areas, parts of them states are going to be gone. They're going to be underwater. We need to stop, obviously, we need to have a massive push to stop the environmental disaster of capitalism. But the only way I believe we can really do it, if we could suddenly stop using fossil fuels, but we can't under capitalism, would be quickly anyway, because we're not in control. We'd have to move to a planned society where we plan everything, plan production of what we're producing, and stop all this unnecessary production. But we're not going to do that anytime soon. So we all have to try and do our bit as best as we can. And by permitting people to work from home, you are doing a lot of it, because you're not producing the CO2 emissions from your car, your vehicle, the petrol and all that. So allowing people to work from home would save millions and millions of journeys a day, because millions of people work in an office, and if you work in an office, you're going to be sat on a computer, which now we have the technology like SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, and everything else that's in the cloud and that's digital. We have the technology now to let you do the task from home. So there should be no requirement for offices apart from laboratories or any type of lab or any type of industry where the workers could not reasonably carry out the task at home. But as a matter of public policy for the environment, we should be forced to work from home, in my honest opinion, because the damage on the environment of petrol and fuel use and so forth is a disaster. It's not just that though, it's capitalism in and of itself, and it's eating animal foods. But anyway, the environment would benefit us all, and the pollution in general, the amount of crap in the air that we breathe in these cities. I know Bangkok has terrible air, I know Manchester has bad air, and I know, ultimately in our modern world, you can't avoid all pollution because of the way that we live our modern lives. But that has to fundamentally change if we want to stop pollution, really. And it should do under an eco-socialist state. But going off on a tangent, stopping the commute will, to some small degree, improve pollution and the environment. And so we should do that as a matter of public policy, as part of the whole goal to live in a renewable, sustainable economy that's not based upon capitalism and not based upon fossil fuels. The next one that I want to talk about is not the environment and is not the commute benefits, that we have massive benefits from working at home. The next one is something that I've never heard anyone talk about, but I know for a fact that millions of people suffer from this because I've been in offices and I've seen it with my own eyes. The next thing that I want to talk about is the office temperatures. Now, you wouldn't usually think, what do you mean, Dave? What do you mean, office temperatures? Ultimately, in Britain, which is like a very up and down climate, where it's only hot a few months of the year, where for the vast majority of the year it's cold, it's very cold, it's very wet and windy. Ultimately, but in the summer, in like June, July, it can go into 30 odd degrees in some days. Now, you wouldn't believe the number of businesses I've worked in where I was either too cold, there was a draft, or too hot. And where, even in some businesses, we weren't given fans, we just had the office centralised, system that did not give everyone the temperature that they wanted. And so you're competing with other staff. Oh no, I'm too cold. Oh no, I'm too hot. Oh no, do this, shut that door, do this. It's ridiculous. You can't get a temperature that you want. You can't feel comfortable when you sat at your desk. You have to put a coat on when you sat there in the winter because someone wants the window open, or the heating's not working, the radiator's gone where you sat. All that total BS again, where you can't sit in a climate that you want to sit in because the office, people have different desires to sit in different temperatures. I always felt in the summer, I always felt in offices that I was too hot in the summer, believe it or not. Even if and part of the reason probably was because I was wearing a shirt, but even when I wore a polo shirt, I felt that I wanted a fan on me. Well, in one company, I had a fan on me all day long, basically, and I liked it. But eventually the fan was gone, and I was told that we're having a, air conditioning unit put in. But the air conditioning unit didn't even come on me and didn't drop the temperature and make me feel as good as having the fan on me. This type of crap is gone when you're working at home because you can control it. You can put a fan on, or you can put a heater on right next to you. You can be in total control of the temperature you want to work in. So temperature at work is another disaster because in many offices you cannot get the right temperature that you want to sit in to do work. And people might say, well, you sound a bit wet there, but it's true. There will be times in the year where the office window's broken, like the actual lever or the handle is snapped off or something like that, and oh yeah, that window's always open, or that window's always shut, you can't open it in the summer. There's loads of stuff like that occurs in offices that you can resolve very quickly at home that you cannot resolve at home. I hope I've explained a lot of reasons why it is massively beneficial for everyone, including the planet, for people to work at home. I hope you take it on board, and I hope you fight and pick jobs that let you work at home, and bring it up to your bosses. Are you going to be allowed to work at home? Use it as a bargaining tool, saying that other companies will let me. Ultimately, when you work from home, you'll never go back to an office full time. Never, ever, ever.